2 minutes ago, Diddy's mother testifies against her own son. Her words broke him. Diddy had always believed in the power of family. From the early days, before the fame and the wealth, it was his mother, Janice Combs, who had been his constant. She was his anchor, the one who steadied him when the world seemed to swirl out of control. There was no doubt in his mind that he owed everything to her. The relentless work ethic she instilled in him, the tough love that pushed him to be better, and the unwavering belief she had in his potential long before anyone else did. Janice wasn't just the matriarch of the Combs family. She was a force to be reckoned with. Her presence was commanding, her intuition sharp, and her strength undeniable. She had been there from the beginning, working 2 jobs, making sacrifices, and never once asking for recognition. She had always told him, "You'll go places, Sean. You just have to believe in yourself as much as I do." And he did. She had helped him turn his dreams into reality, guiding him through every obstacle with a fierce determination that made him believe he could conquer anything. As Diddy sat in the courtroom, staring at the cold, sterile surroundings, the weight of what was happening began to sink in. The trial had quickly become one of the most high-profile cases of the year. The accusations against him were serious, ones he had never imagined would surface. It wasn't just about business misdeeds or celebrity feuds. These were personal attacks, ones that cut deeper than anything he had ever experienced. They were aimed directly at his character, the very thing he had built his empire on. Diddy, once untouchable in his confidence, now sat in a defendant's chair, surrounded by a sea of flashing cameras, reporters, and the unrelenting gaze of the public. He glanced at the gallery, where his supporters sat, waiting for him to prove his innocence. His mind raced, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The tension in the air was palpable. He had prepared for this moment, but not like this, not with his mother set to take the stand. Janice Combs had always been a behind-the-scenes figure, a quiet force that worked tirelessly for her son's success. She had always been the one to give advice, to tell him when to stay low, when to speak out. She was the one who had steered him away from the pitfalls of the industry and kept him grounded, even when the temptations of fame threatened to pull him under. Diddy had trusted her completely, never once questioning her motives or her loyalty. But today, everything was different. The prosecutor's opening remarks had already been damning, painting Diddy as a man whose success was built on deception and shady dealings. But it wasn't the prosecutor's words that made his stomach churn. It was the thought of what his mother might say when it was her turn. Could she really turn against him? Could she really betray him in front of the whole world? The moment came faster than he expected. The doors to the courtroom opened with a creak, and all eyes turned to the entrance. Janice Combs walked in, calm and composed, her dark eyes scanning the room as if taking in every detail. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, her presence commanding the space despite her quiet demeanor. For a brief moment, Diddy felt a pang of relief. She looked as though she was just another person in the courtroom, not the woman who had once been the center of his universe. But that relief was short-lived. When Janice took the stand, Diddy's heart dropped. He had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, he didn't feel ready. His mother's eyes met his briefly, and in that instant, he saw something he hadn't expected, a flicker of hesitation. It was a look that caused his stomach to twist, but before he could process it, the prosecutor began questioning her. Her voice rang out clear and steady, though there was an edge to it that he hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Combs," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about your son's behavior in the years leading up to his rise in the music industry?" Janice paused for a moment, her lips pressed together in a thin line. She had always been protective of Diddy, even in the most difficult moments, but now, in the face of this trial, she seemed almost detached. "My son," she began, her voice measured, "is a man of many talents. He's ambitious, driven, and relentless. But like all men of ambition, there are things he's done that he wishes he could take back." Diddy's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, and for a moment, he thought he might choke on them. What was she saying? Had she really come here to air his dirty laundry? The courtroom was silent, save for Janice's steady voice, as she began to recount incidents he thought were buried deep in the past. His mind raced, but there was no escaping the reality unfolding before him. This was it. His mother, the one person who had always been in his corner, was now the one who held the power to destroy everything he had worked for. He had always trusted her implicitly, but now, in this moment, he wondered if she had ever truly trusted him. As the testimony continued, Diddy felt the walls closing in. The courtroom, once a space filled with the energy of the trial, now felt suffocating. Every word Janice spoke seemed to strip away another layer of his carefully constructed persona, exposing him to the world in a way he never thought possible. The family secrets, the mistakes, the hidden fears, his mother was laying it all bare. Diddy didn't know how much longer he could sit there. His mind was spinning, his body tense. What had he done to deserve this? What had he done to lose her trust, to lose the one person who had always believed in him? But as the trial continued, one thing became painfully clear. The storm had only just begun. Janice's voice filled the courtroom, steady and composed, as though she had been preparing for this moment for years. But the words she spoke, words Diddy had never expected, struck him like a series of thunderclaps. His mother, the woman who had supported him through every dark moment, was now laying bare the secrets he had fought so hard to keep hidden. With each sentence, she painted a portrait of a man who was not the flawless superstar the world admired, but someone far more complicated, someone far more broken. Sean is a man of great ambition, she said, her tone measured but not without a cold edge. But ambition, when unchecked, can lead to mistakes. And my son, like all of us, is not immune to those mistakes. Diddy's stomach twisted as he sat in the defendant's chair, listening to the details of his past that no one had ever dared to bring to light. His vices, his missteps, the moments when he had made decisions that hurt the people closest to him. They were all being exposed, one by one, as though Janice was peeling away the layers of his soul, revealing everything he had hoped to leave buried. She spoke of his rise to fame, the parties, the late-night deals, the people he had stepped on to get ahead. She didn't just mention his work. She detailed the personal costs, the toll it had taken on his relationships, on his family. There were nights when I would call him, worried, only for him to tell me that he was too busy to talk. Too busy to even check in with his own mother, Janice continued, her voice carrying through the room. I spent years telling him that the people he surrounded himself with weren't true friends, that they were using him. And yet he couldn't see it. Diddy's face flushed with heat, the words like a hot iron searing into his skin. How could she say this? How could she betray him like this? The weight of his past sins, the mistakes he had buried deep within himself, suddenly felt like a suffocating blanket. For the first time, he saw himself not through his own eyes, but through the eyes of the one person who had always been his greatest advocate. And what she saw was a man who had lost his way. He tried to focus, to keep himself grounded, but it felt impossible. The courtroom around him felt as though it were closing in, the walls tightening with each new revelation. He had always been able to control the narrative of his life, shaping how the world saw him. He had built his empire from the ground up, each success a testament to his drive, to his vision. But now, in the harsh light of his mother's testimony, he realized that he had been living in a carefully constructed illusion. Don't get me wrong, Janice continued, her voice softening just slightly. I've always loved my son. He's my pride. But love can't make you blind to the truth. I wanted to help him, to guide him, but there were times when he refused to listen. Times when he pushed me away, and I had to watch from the sidelines as he made choices that would hurt him in the long run. Diddy's heart pounded in his chest as his mother's words cut deeper. She wasn't just airing his dirty laundry. She was speaking the truth, a truth he had spent so many years denying. He had never fully understood how much his actions had affected her, how his decisions had driven a wedge between them, until now. The realization hit him like a blow to the gut. He had always prided himself on his ability to take control of his own destiny. Yet here he was on trial, stripped of his defenses, with his mother, of all people, telling the world just how much he had failed. His mind flashed back to the countless moments he had been so wrapped up in his own ambitions, so consumed by the desire to succeed, that he had neglected everything else. He had neglected her. He had neglected his family. Janice spoke again, her tone growing more personal, more direct. There came a point when I realized that I couldn't protect him anymore. He was too deep in his own world, surrounded by yes men, by people who only cared about what he could give them. They didn't care about him as a person, only as the brand, the empire he had built. And that, my friends, is what led to the choices he made. The choices that haunt him now. Her words echoed through the room, and Diddy felt as though the ground beneath him was crumbling. His empire, his success, everything he had built, it all felt meaningless in this moment. His mother wasn't speaking to the public about his accomplishments or his fame. She wasn't talking about the good he had done. She was talking about the flaws, the selfishness, the moments where he had prioritized his career over his family. And worse still, she was doing it in front of the whole world. I watched as he pushed people away. He built walls around himself, Janice continued, her voice laced with a bitterness Diddy had never heard before. And the worst part is that I was the one who helped him build those walls. I was the one who helped him cover up the things he didn't want anyone to know. I thought I was doing it to protect him, to protect the image he had created. But in doing so, I allowed him to keep living a lie. And that's something I'll never forgive myself for. Diddy's heart felt like it was being torn in two. He wanted to stand up, to shout, to tell her that this wasn't the truth, that she didn't understand. But he knew deep down that she was right. He had made choices, terrible choices, that had alienated the people who mattered most. He had pushed his mother away, just as she said. And now, she was holding him accountable, doing what no one else had dared to do. He swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. This wasn't just a trial for his career. It was a trial for his soul. And as Janice's testimony continued, he realized that no matter the outcome of this case, he would have to live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. And he wasn't sure he could ever repair the damage. The days that followed Janice's testimony felt like a blur to Diddy. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, the media hungry for any new details to further fuel the growing scandal. Each time he turned on the television or flipped through his phone, there were headlines that felt like daggers to his chest. Diddy's dark past exposed. Mother turns on son in public betrayal. The Combs family secret. The storm that had once seemed distant was now a full-on hurricane, ripping through every facet of his life, and he couldn't escape it. Diddy had built his career on the idea that he could control the narrative, that he could create the world he wanted people to see. And for so long, it had worked. He was known for his business acumen, his larger-than-life personality, and his seemingly perfect image. But now, all of that had come crashing down, leaving him exposed in a way that no one, least of all him, had ever anticipated. Each night, Diddy found himself awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep, his mind racing. He had always believed that his mother was invincible, that her loyalty was a constant in a world where everything else seemed to shift. But now, that trust had been shattered. As Janice's words echoed in his mind, he was forced to confront the truth of his past decisions. The late nights, the mistakes, the relationships he had neglected. And most painfully of all, the way he had hurt the one person who had always been there for him. Diddy knew that the public's perception of him had changed irrevocably. The support he had once enjoyed, fueled by his charisma, his charm, and the illusion of perfection, was slipping away. And now, more than ever, he felt alone. The people around him, the ones who had once been his closest allies, now seemed like strangers. Was anyone still truly on his side? Or were they just waiting for the next scandal to break? He couldn't tell anymore. In the quiet moments, when the cameras were no longer flashing and the chaos had subsided, Diddy found himself wrestling with something deeper than just his public image. The questions lingered in the silence. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this? But buried underneath the anger and the confusion was something far more profound: guilt. A deep, gnawing guilt that he had spent so many years running from. A guilt that now consumed him completely. As the trial continued, Diddy's lawyers worked tirelessly to salvage what was left of his career. But it felt like every move they made only dug him deeper into the hole. Every statement, every piece of evidence they presented, seemed to be overshadowed by the weight of his mother's testimony. She had already said it all. What more was there to prove? What was left for him to say when the woman who had known him better than anyone else had already laid bare everything he had tried to keep hidden? One afternoon, as Diddy sat in his office, trying to focus on the pile of paperwork in front of him, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen was familiar, his lawyer, Andre. Diddy hesitated before answering, knowing that whatever news he was about to hear wouldn't be good. "Diddy, we need to talk." Andre's voice was calm, but there was an urgency in his tone. "We've received a new development in the case. It's not looking good." Diddy sat up straight, his heart racing. "What now?" he asked, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. "I don't want to get into specifics just yet, but there's a new piece of evidence, something that could change everything. We might be able to shift the narrative, but it's going to require you to step up in a way you haven't before. You need to be honest, Diddy. The public needs to hear your side of the story, not just hers." He felt a cold chill sweep over him. For so long, he had been playing the game of public perception, trying to craft a version of himself that the world would buy into. But now, honesty seemed like the only thing that could save him. He had to face his truth, not just for the world, but for himself, for the man he had become and the one he wanted to be. "I'm not sure I can do that," Diddy admitted, the weight of his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "She's my mother. She's the one person who's always had my back. And now she's turned on me." "I get it, Diddy," Andre said softly, his voice full of understanding. "But you can't change what's already been said. What you can control is what happens from here on out. You need to step out in front of this. The public wants to see the real you, your flaws, your mistakes, your humanity. They want to know that you're more than just the brand." Diddy's mind raced, the walls closing in as he processed the weight of Andre's words. Was it really possible for him to do that? Could he expose the man behind the empire, the man who had built everything on a foundation of deception? Was he ready to face the judgment that would inevitably follow? The thought terrified him, but it also gave him something he hadn't had in a long time: control. If he could stand up, if he could own his mistakes, perhaps there was a way to rebuild. Not just his career, but his relationship with his mother, his family, and himself. "I'll do it," Diddy said finally, the words feeling like a weight lifting off his shoulders. "But I need to do it on my terms. I'm not going to let anyone control this story." "Good," Andre said. "We'll figure out the best way to approach this. But remember, Diddy, this is your chance to make it right." As Diddy hung up the phone, he felt a sense of clarity that had eluded him for days. The road ahead would be difficult, there was no doubt about that, but it was a road he had to walk. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might just be ready to face the music. The days following Diddy's decision to confront the truth were filled with a quiet kind of chaos. Though the public spectacle of the trial was still in full swing, with every movement of his being scrutinized, Diddy found himself retreating from the spotlight. He'd always been the one who thrived in front of cameras, the one who could turn any moment into a performance. But now, with everything hanging in the balance, he felt an overwhelming desire to be alone, to strip away the facade and face himself. He spent his days in his penthouse, pacing from room to room, often stopping in front of the large windows that overlooked the city. The skyline was the same as it had always been, a constant reminder of the empire he had built. But as he looked out at the view, it no longer felt like a triumph. Instead, it felt like a prison, the weight of his past mistakes pressing down on him with each passing hour. The view that had once been his pride, his symbol of success, now seemed like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. Diddy had made the decision to step forward, to take ownership of the mistakes his mother had exposed. But as the days dragged on, the fear of doing so began to mount. He was no longer just a public figure. He was a man standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into the unknown. He had always been able to control his image, to dictate how people saw him. But now he had to strip away all the layers and expose himself for who he truly was. The man behind the brand, the flaws that had always been there but had never seen the light of day. One evening, as Diddy sat alone in his office, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Andre, his lawyer, looking as calm as ever but with a sense of urgency in his step. "I've been working on a statement," Andre said, closing the door behind him. "We've got to get ahead of the press. If we're going to do this, we need to control the narrative, even if that means stepping into the storm." Diddy glanced up at him, a tired smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, I know. But it's not just about controlling the narrative anymore. It's about facing the consequences. The truth. And it scares the hell out of me, Andre." "I know," Andre said, his voice softening. "But you've got to do this. For your own peace of mind, and for the world to see that you're willing to face what's been holding you back." Diddy leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. He hadn't known peace in years, not in the way Andre was suggesting. It had always been about the next big deal, the next success, the next project. There had been no room for introspection. He had built walls around himself, and for a long time they had worked. But now those walls were crumbling, and he had to face the man inside them. As the conversation shifted to the specifics of the statement, Diddy's mind wandered back to his mother's testimony. He could still hear her voice in his head, the words echoing in his ears. "I tried to protect him, but I couldn't anymore." The weight of those words crushed him each time he thought about them. His mother had always been his protector, his guide, and the idea that he had failed her, that he had made her feel like she had no choice but to turn on him, was almost too much to bear. He had been living in denial for so long, pushing the truth away because it was easier to pretend it wasn't there. But now, the truth had been dragged into the light, and there was no turning back. Diddy had always known that fame came with its price. The late nights, the pressure to be perfect, the constant demand for more. But what he hadn't fully understood was the toll it had taken on those closest to him. The people who had given him their all, only to be left behind in the pursuit of his dreams. He had always believed that success was the ultimate goal, that it would be worth the sacrifices. But now, as the fallout from the trial unfolded, he realized just how wrong he had been. The media frenzy wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the family he had left behind in his wake. The people who had once been his foundation, the ones who had supported him when no one else would, were now casualties of his ambition. And that was the hardest truth of all. Diddy knew what he had to do. He had to stand in front of the world and own his mistakes. But he also knew that doing so wouldn't be easy. The world wouldn't just forgive him because he was famous, or because he was willing to admit his flaws. The public wanted blood, they wanted a reason to tear him down, and the idea of stepping into that storm made him want to run. But as the days passed and the weight of his mother's betrayal continued to haunt him, Diddy realized that the only way to heal was to face the very thing he feared the most, the truth. He had spent so many years running from it, burying it deep within himself. But now there was no running. There was only accountability. That evening, as Diddy stood in front of the mirror, preparing to face the press, he took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. He had always been able to control his image, but today, there would be no control. Today, he was simply a man who had made mistakes, who had hurt the people he loved, and who was ready to make amends. As he stepped out of his office and into the waiting car, Diddy knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity. He was ready to face whatever came next, not for the public, not for the brand, but for himself. The reckoning had come, and there was no turning back.